Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone. My name is Refilwe Bijeng, and I'm the ATAF Communications Coordinator. Welcome to our webinar about ATAF's impact in the year 2023. I'm so excited to announce that we are now live streaming both on Facebook and on YouTube. So wherever you're joining from, welcome and thank you for joining us. Without further ado, ladies and gentlemen, your host, Mr. Lindstrom Marango.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Refilwe, and it's such a joy to see our participants joining in today as we start our conversation for the day. As Refilwe mentioned, my name is Lindstrom Marango, and I'm so delighted to be your host for this particular podcast. As Refilwe mentioned, today's discussion really is about the impact of the work that we do here at ATAF and how this work is shaping the tax landscape in the continent. And so we are going to be delving quite deep into some of the work that we have done and how this work is shaping the tax landscape in the continent. But the way, just first things first, is the way we've structured today's conversation is quite interesting because we are having two sets of speakers and panelists. So we have panelists from senior management within ATAF who will share their perspective regarding the work that we do, how it's impacting the tax landscape in Africa, how we are assisting and supporting countries mobilize domestic resources and address tax-related illicit financial flows. And then later, we will also hear from tax administrations who are our members regarding how the work that we've done in their countries have impacted domestic resource mobilization in their countries, as well as addressing tax-related illicit financial flows in their countries. So buckle up, it's going to be an exciting conversation. I can also see our DES, our Deputy Executive Secretary, Madam Mary Baine, in the conversation, and welcome, and it's such a joy to have you. So as I mentioned earlier, the focus of our conversation is looking into the ATAF's report. We just published our 2023 report, which is available in all the three languages, French, English, and Portuguese. And for those of us who are watching on Zoom, we will be providing a link to the report so that you can be able to download it from there. And those who are live streaming from either YouTube, our YouTube page, or our Facebook page, we will also provide a link to the report on both on all the three platforms so that you're able to access that report. So that report offers a lot of insights into the work that we've done here at ATAF in the last year regarding capacity building, some of the key areas that I'll be mentioning that we are focusing on. And it's good for you to just go through it and see the impact of the work that we do on the continent and how that is influencing the tax space, both within the continent and even outside Africa. So some of the key focus areas for our conversation today, we will be looking at how is ATAF supporting countries in terms of their tax administration. So we'll look at how are we building capacity for our countries, country programs. We'll look at building technical capacity that is tailored to countries depending on their needs. We will also look at regionalization because today ATAF has 44 member countries. We are so glad that just recently one of our latest countries to join ATAF is DRC, the Democratic Republic of Congo, and we are very excited that the Africa is uniting together to be able to address challenges around domestic resource mobilization, as well as addressing illicit financial flows in Africa. So look at regionalization and how then is ATAF supporting all its member countries now that we continue to grow within the continent. We also look at the African voice. How are we influencing, or how is ATAF amplifying the Africa voice in global tax matters? There are a lot of conversations ongoing around tax at the OECD, at the UN level, and many other discussions around taxes from a global perspective, and then we'll be able to look at how is ATAF supporting its members and how is ATAF participating in influencing and amplifying the Africa voice in that particular space. We will also be able to look at data, statistics, research. How is ATAF and how has ATAF been able again to influence that space? And some of the work that we are doing here at ATAF to be able then to assist our member countries and to support Africa continue to grow our domestic resources. So without further ado, I'll introduce our panelists. And today, like I mentioned before, we have 3 panelists and who are our senior managers here at ATAF. And we also have 3 panelists representing, sampling some of our member countries and the work that we are doing in that space. So we have Mr. Anthony Monanda, who is in charge of our DRM here at the African Tax Administration Forum. We have Mr. Emeka Nanko, who is the acting senior manager in charge of our member services, and Mr. Tulani Shongwe, who is in charge of our Africa Multilateral Tax Cooperation. They will be sharing quite a lot around what we have done, the impact of this work on the continent and how it's shaping our tax landscape. Then later, we will also get to hear from 3 countries who are member countries and just get to hear from their perspective, how is the ATAF's work impacting the work that is ongoing in our countries. So we'll get to hear from Dr. Philip, who is the Director Research and Planning from Sierra Leone. We'll also get to hear from Miss Stella Nyapendi, who is the country correspondent from the Uganda Revenue Authority. And we also get a chance to hear from Mr. Ronald Niwenshuti, who is the Assistant Commissioner from Taxpayer Audit from RRA, that is Rwanda. So we're excited to get to hear all these conversations. And I want to jump straight into it and start with our first panelist, and this is Mr. Emeka Nanko. And as I mentioned before, Emeka Nanko is in charge of our member services. Good morning, Mr. Emeka.
Good morning, Lindstrom. Good morning, colleagues, and good morning, everyone that has joined this morning.
Awesome, Mr. Emeka. And before we delve into the deep conversations of the day, one of the questions that we usually get is, when we talk about member services, what exactly are we talking about? What kind of services do we provide as member services? And then we are going to delve deeper into what we do at member services and what we have done. Maybe we can start from there, Emeka.
All right. Thank you, Lindstrom. When we say member services in ATAF, it's basically saying, again, the basic principle and strategy of the organization, which has been member-centric. It's talking about we being member-focused, because notwithstanding whatever we do, be within being the voice of Africa or representing the opinions and making sure that perspective of Africa is recognized, providing resources or tools for countries, is all about what members can do with what we've provided or what we're doing, because they are the ones we are representing. They make up the secretariat, they make up ATAF, the 44 members. So it's about making sure that there's value to members. In terms of this value, it comes through the capacity building and engagement, things that are tailored towards members. And there are about 3 ways in which we do this. One is general training within the Tax Academy, where we provide training across different subject matters. This covers from tax audits, transfer pricing, data analytics, taxpayer services, and such. So it cuts between policy administration and all other issues and processes and procedure. But we also have country-specific supports under the country programs. These are short-term and long-term supports. Short-term support could be just troubleshooting a single issue within a meeting or a short period of time, less than 6 months to 1 year. While long-term could be we working with a country over 2 to 3 years to look at a specific issue through the process, the legislation, and then hand-holding where there's some sort of implementation that is also required or enforcement. And then the last part is thought leadership on the continent. Because we can't do all this and engage on the continent without having some sort of thought leadership. And when we say thought leadership, what do we mean? Research that is based on Africa, data from the continent, and mostly research done by those interested about, again, development and progress of Africa to understand the environment. So we provide access to data, we provide platform for academia and researchers who are interested to conduct research within the context of tax policy and administration in Africa. And we have what we call the ATAF data bank, which we're now opening up to those interested in research. And we're also putting together all the necessary information, documents, statistics, and data that might assist in research. And of course, we have the ATRN, which is the African Tax Research Network, where we have the annual Congress, where we bring together people to discuss the salient issues from a research perspective. And then that results into what we call the African Multidisciplinary Tax Journal, which is a yearly publication journal by ATAF of different research papers that have been done and gone through a scientific review. So through these three major pillars, we try to make sure we provide value to our members. But all of it, the process, the content, the engagement, it's all about the members. What value, what is expected of us from members, what is the interest of our members, and how do we, again, provide that liquidity of capacity and capability on the continent within revenue administration and outside. Because when that is done, then we have an improved tax system.
Thank you, Emeka. And just a reminder to our members and our participants that if you have a question, please feel free to put it in the Q&A section and we'll respond to the questions as we go along. Now, Emeka, just to dive deeper into what we have done. And when you look at the 2023 report that we just published, from a member services perspective, a lot has been done in terms of building capacity for members, a lot of trainings done, development of certain materials. Would you please speak into that? Specifically, what have we done in the last 1 year that you'd like members to know, and the impact of what we've seen done in terms of revenue? Are we seeing revenue growing? Are we seeing DRM growing in the countries based on the work that we have done here at ATAF?
All right. Yeah. I think before I get into whether there's revenue and what's been done, we have to put context to what is at stake. And put into context what is at stake. I mean, we usually, for anything we're doing, you have a goal. Looking at IFFs and developments, we can put it within context by thinking what the financing gap is, for example. Looking at certain publications that have tried to establish what the financing gap is in terms of achieving the SDGs or what is required to achieve certain development level within developing countries. Some will pitch it around 3.9 trillion at the moment. If we look at IFFs, with continuous conversation about IFFs and the need to stem it, depending again on what publication you look at or what school of thought you look at, we're talking about between 50 to 80 billion per annum in terms of IFF. And then looking within the context that ODAs are also reducing in percentage and the credit issues that the African countries are having. This puts into context what is at stake for African countries in terms of being able to mobilize revenue to fund development within all this context. So looking at that, we'll come down to what has ATAF done in respect of that. I mentioned earlier about trying to build capacity on the continent, liquidity of capacity of people with the ability within and outside revenue authority as a way to improve the tax system. And one of those is, again, through the Tax Academy and the trainings. We've had trainings last year around transfer pricing. We also had on tax audits. But with tax audits also, we're going into sector-specific areas like telecom, financial sector, sectors that we know are critical to African economies and are big contributors to the GDP, and of course, extractives. And then with that training, we've been able to train about over 4,000 officials on the continent in the last year. These trainings are a combination of general trainings that are open within the ATAF Tax Academy that collection revenue administrators are free to join. But some of it are also country-specific capacity building, where we've brought together people from different functions within a country to train them on a specific subject matter. So within training, that has happened, but we always strive again. In the last year, we've also strived to improve the quality of the training by putting together certain frameworks within the ATAF to continue the process of making sure we have the tax academy that we want on the continent, again, with the goal of having enough capacity and improving the quality of people on the continent in terms of when it comes to tax. On the other part is the country-specific support, where we provide country-specific support to countries. This comes in 3 levels or to 4 levels, where we scope out the country to find out what the issues are, what are the areas of need, because we also recognize that countries have myriad of issues, but countries also have different development partners working with them. but we identify where the help is needed. Is it short-term, is it long-term, in collaboration with that country. And right after that, we get into the capacity building phase, trying to, again, engage the responsible officials and build up capacity, and then we do the hand-holding. And throughout this process, we've been able, in terms of impact revenue, to raise additional from the information or the feedback we received and engage in those countries, and the direct audits that were done in hand-holding, $620 million. This brings the total, again, into perspective of what has been contributed or gotten through this process, probably in the last 10 to 8 years, to about 2.1 billion. Again, adding certain areas of support beyond audits, like where we've had to support with legislative changes around, for example, VAT on cross-border compliance. That alone has yielded about 240 million in the last 3 years from just about 5 countries that have received support. But in all this process, we also help countries in making both legislative and administrative policy reforms. And these changes have been about 55 of those legislative changes, including secondary legislation and administrative policies around transfer pricing, interest deductibility, VAT on cross-border, and others. So these have been the direct impacts that we could see from this. And some of our member countries have also reported, about 5 to 9 countries have reported improvement on tax to GDP ratio. Of course, we know there are many contributions to tax to GDP ratio improvement, but it's good to see that with all the engagement and the support being provided to those countries, that it adds to that increment and seeing the improvement within that system, because it's one of the ways we can measure if there's any level of improvement in a way, again, looking at the externalities and other issues that might affect it. So generally, in figures and in terms of impact, that's how, again, ATAF work has been in 2023 in terms of supporting countries and addressing IFS and raising revenue for development finance. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Emeka, for highlighting key numbers, interesting statistics around the impact of the work at ATAF. And these numbers are available in the 2023 report. You can be able to check the report. It has quite a number of those numbers. Emeka, before I let you go, one of the questions we keep getting, and probably you can speak into this before we go to Anthony, is the African Tax Academy. And there's a lot of work that is ongoing to institutionalize the African Tax Academy in that sense and grow our ability to provide capacity across the continent. Would you in brief just mention around some of the work that we're doing around this, the African Tax Academy, which is a premier academy for the African Tax Administration Forum?
All right. Thank you. In terms of the Tax Academy, I said we're constantly working, again, to improve the quality, but I think the most important thing to us is reach. Democratizing access to capacity building, because we realize the more you democratize and have a reach and expand people that have access. And when we talk about access, we're talking about quality training, but at minimal cost to the receivers, because the interest is, again, improving the standards on the continent. So for us, the major focus is democratizing, expanding our reach, ability of tax officials, and extending beyond tax officials. Because we are seeing that, again, if you look at things like data analytics, or now that we're moving into the tax administration 4.0, or we're still at 3.0, there's high turnover of people within certain areas. So the question is, how would tax administrations also deal with this turnover of people coming in and out of the system? And one of the ways to deal with that is making sure you have liquidity of capable people within and outside the Revenue Authority, because the Revenue Authority recruits from its environments. So we're also seeing how we can contribute to that, to make sure that no matter what happens, Revenue Authorities have, you know, a lot of capable hands to either employ, reach out to, or redeploy in that instance. But we're also looking at what would the future trend of taxation look like, and how do we start preparing tax administrations by putting those within the trainings, whether there are specific subject areas that we need to focus on, or making sure that certain issues are mainstreamed within the trainings. Nowadays, we can't talk about compliance risk management without talking about the data part of it. We can't talk about audit without talking about the data part of it. Even when we talk about taxpayer services, in understanding the behavior of taxpayers, or how we need to offer services, or the best channels, or how taxpayers receive services, we still have to talk about data analysis. So again, we're looking at those and seeing how such issues can, again, be mainstreamed within all aspects of the value chain of revenue administration in that aspect. And then, of course, how do we also use resources that already exist and are working on the continent to form some sort of peer exchange and allow for some sort of interactions within the academy for engagement to better understand it. So if something has worked, for example, if Kenya has a great tax register cleaning process exercise, how do we take that and put it into a capacity building so that other countries can come together and learn from that? So again, using what has worked on the continent and putting that through. But the longer term is again to have an accredited tax academy that can actually again issue certificates. We're also working with countries to ensure that for our colleagues, that when you attend all these training and ATAF events, also it accounts for your continuous professional development beyond just learning. It also contributes to your career progress. Thank you, Lindstrom.
Thank you, Anthony. Thank you, Emeka, for that. And I want to move to Anthony just briefly to speak about what we're doing at DRM. So Anthony is our senior manager in charge of domestic resource mobilization. And Anthony, before we sort of again dig deep into the report and what we've done, would you just speak into DRM? What exactly do we do at DRM here at ATAF?
Thank you very much. I hope you can hear me well.
Yes, you're very clear.
Thank you, Lindstrom, and thank you and good morning, colleagues. So ATAF in DRM, we focus on tax policy. So DRM, therefore, is a division within ATAF that looks at tax policy, both in international tax and domestic taxes. And the purpose, therefore, is to develop solutions that are practical for the continent to address issues around those two areas, that is international tax and domestic taxes. As we do that, I want to ride on a couple of comments that Emeka mentioned. We make sure that we develop solutions that are inspired by the data, by research, and more importantly, all and the realities of our members. So we see solutions based on our understanding, based on engagement with the members. And when we see gaps out there that require a response, then we start working on those solutions so that we are able to give members products that can help them to address any existing gaps in both international tax and transfer pricing. Thanks.
Awesome. Thank you, Anthony. Now, again, Anthony, looking at the 2023 report, the annual report that has just been released by ATAF, a lot again has been done in this space. And I would like you to speak into how then has ATAF contributed towards improving tax policy in the continent. And you can touch on international tax. I know you just mentioned there are suggested approaches that have been developed. There are manuals, toolkits. Would you just dig deep into that and let us know what exactly has ATAF done in this space, and also touching on the impact of some of these toolkits and suggested approaches that are we seeing people utilizing them? Are we seeing countries using them? Would you speak into that?
Yeah, thank you very much. I think it's important before we dive into those, just as Emeka mentioned, it's good to see why we are doing this. We are doing this as the DRM because we think that we need to support our members in two ways. One, we need to build capacity. That's what member service is doing through technical assistance. But we want to help countries in other things, particularly tax policy. That's why now ATAF is quite engaged in tax policy design and conversations, which have been now taken at a higher level, including at the policy makers, the ministries of finance. And later on, you'll hear from Tulani what we are doing from the African Union Commission perspective, because we think that to address the issues of DRM, to address issues of illicit financial flows in the continent, we not only need to train, but also build policies that can change compliance behavior of particularly multinationals. Statistics have shown that illicit financial flows, a significant part of it, about 60%, is facilitated through commercial transactions. Those are multinationals that get into aggressive structuring of transactions, which leads to base erosion. There are also other gaps, particularly excessive tax incentives. And therefore, we got to be able to respond to those also from a policy perspective. And that if we do that, we're saying that changes the compliance behavior of multinationals and can positively start changing the narrative. And what is the narrative at the moment? Very low tax to GDP ratios in the continent, which are around 15%. You had the comments made by Emeka that there is a financing gap. Okay, another study which currently IMF is working on is showing that if many developing countries, including Africa, have got to enjoy sustainable development goals, they need to significantly increase tax to GDP to about 18, even maybe 17 to 18%. So tax policy is quite central to that journey. And therefore now that context is important. Coming to now your specific question, what is ATAF doing? Couple of things. ATAF is an advisory organization, and therefore we have embarked on a journey from a couple of years ago to build internal resources, capacity, subject matter experts that understand these issues, and they are able actually to drive the conversation about tax policy design. So that's one angle. And then the second angle, which is also very important, is creating technical committees. We develop products, and those products need to be owned by the members. So ATAF Secretariat sits together, reflects, identifies issues, and then have a conversation with the technical committees. And those technical committees are able to assist the Secretariat in designing this kind of solution. So one of the oldest technical committee that I'm pleased to have served in the early years, that is a cross-border technical committee. And that was created actually to respond to challenges of the BEPS project, because at the time around 2014, Africa, ATAF needed to participate in the conversation. And as part of that journey, we started building our, of course, capacity to participate in the conversation, and more importantly, using the experiences and observations from that process, we started the journey of developing suggested approaches, which is basically adapting and changing some global solutions to be able to respond to African realities. And one of the oldest solutions we developed is the ATAF suggested approach to drafting transfer pricing legislation. And that product has been quite impactful. Together with a couple of others, and I'll mention those. That is a suggested approach to defining permanent establishments, and the suggested approach to drafting interest deductibility legislation. So those two are international tax products. And based on our study and statistics, we have seen about 16 African countries have already introduced domestic laws, largely relying on those suggested approach. And by count, those actually laws we have seen are actually about 40 legislations that have been introduced over the last couple of 6-7 years since we started this journey. So it's been quite impactful because you can see many countries that have also actually introduced those legislations. They are also benefiting from ATAF capacity building, which means they have a policy design, and also they're actually benefiting from capacity building. And those countries have actually been enjoying some transformation in terms of tax collection. And lastly, just to respond to the current conversation, the current conversation has been issues of digitalization. So when that journey began around 4 years, particularly at the OECD Inclusive Framework conversation, we were also part of that conversation, and at a later stage, I'll talk about it. But we also developed an African solution, which is a suggested approach to drafting digital services legislation. And that solution has also been quite helpful to many of our members in responding to income tax related issues on taxing digital firms. Okay, we got countries such as Kenya and now Tanzania, Uganda, and also other countries such as Nigeria and Zimbabwe that also have introduced measures with some inspiration from our suggested approach. From a VAT perspective, Emeka mentioned this, but we also have a very special toolkit that was developed last year and released. That's the VAT digital toolkit. which has been quite instrumental to the policymakers and also to businesses in better to design and also implement taxation of imposition of VAT on cross-border digital supplies. And these have also been supported by a range of other tools. The list is quite long. We have tools around audit manuals. We have a special suggested approach to drafting transfer pricing audit manual. We also have a suggested approach on how to prepare and execute an audit, which gives very broad guidance on how to do carry out those kind of audits. So therefore, from a policy design perspective, creation of toolkits and manuals, and then that coupled with very properly designed and implemented capacity building, we have seen a lot of transformation. And I want just to mention a couple of very impactful solutions. In international tax, if you are not able to stop excessive interest deduction, then there is always a very big problem. And we've seen many countries that have introduced the legislation around limitation of interest and deduction, special rules around documentation, which also forms part of our ATAF suggested approach, special rules to address issues of extractive, particularly in how to use commodity pricing approaches, and those have been quite impactful. I can go on and on. Please allow me to stop here, but thanks a lot. Yeah.
Thank you, Anthony. I mean, it's clear that quite a lot has been done in this space. And for participants, before the end of this podcast, we'll be showcasing you where you can access the materials that Anthony just mentioned. There are quite a number, and we'll show you how to access these materials for those who may not have a copy. So, Anthony, one of the other areas that ATAF has been big on is standard setting. And specifically because we do recognize there's a lot that is happening at the global space, we need to participate and influence standard setting in various spaces, including the OECD. And before we let you go, Anthony, we would like you to speak into that. How are we influencing the global standard setting process? And in what spaces is ATAF involved in, and how are we supporting our member countries in this regard?
Thank you, Lindstrom, once more for that question. I think first and foremost, it's good to ask ourselves, why do we participate? Yeah. We participate in that conversation because we are increasingly living in a global village. Even tax is a sovereign issue, but there are also cross-border transactions. So whenever we start talking about cross-border transactions, then we need to think about what tax measures work in that context. Most of the tax measures in that context, actually, they are beyond, of course, our national borders, because we've got to think about how you address things like maybe allocation of taxing rights between one country to the other. You've got to think about how you address things like double taxation, and also now, particularly in transfer pricing, you got to think about how eventually you allocate the rights to tax in different jurisdictions, largely following the economic realities of the transaction. So therefore, as a continent, as ATAF and our members, it's good to participate in the conversation where those global standards that address themselves to those issues are designed, so that when the final solutions are developed, they are solutions that make sense to the continent. They are solutions that give a fair and equitable allocation of taxing rights. They are solutions that can be implemented by our members. So that's the reason why we participate in that conversation. Now, how have we been doing it? First, ATAF and a couple of other international organizations have been given an opportunity by the OECD Inclusive Framework to participate like observers, because ATAF is not a member country. So we participate as an observer in a couple of working groups in the OECD. That's Working Party 1, Working Party 6, and also in the task force for the digital economy, as well as in the steering group. That is at the OECD. we equally have similar status at the United Nations tax committees and subcommittees, particularly where in different subcommittees, we also participate in the conversation, because also at the UN, there are also standards that are also very important for us to participate and also steer those standards. In our participation, we have worked very closely with the committees, the technical committees, particularly the CBT, so that we make presentations in the committees, we have a conversation, we take a position. Then when we take our position over the years, we have been releasing what we call technical notes. Now, those technical notes have been providing position to our members, so that when countries go now to participate and take a position, they can participate in, of course, from an informed perspective, and that has been quite impactful. The other way in which we've been trying to ensure that there is good participation is also having a pre-meeting, preparatory meeting, especially when there is a core discussion taking place. And that has been quite important. And we've been able to consolidate, bring together, particularly African countries that are in the steering group to have a more impactful voice in the conversation, because we are able to talk together, take a position, and that unified approach has really helped. But it has not been all great. There's been challenges, and I think it's good for me to mention a couple of the challenges, and I think those challenges are learning point for us. Over the years, we've seen challenges for many of our members to participate, and these challenges in some ways are actually driven by the process itself. These conversations have been quite fast, very complex, and actually making it very challenging for many tax administration and governments to participate. But we have on many occasions called for our members to remain resolute, committed to the process. Even with all these challenges, we are there to help you so that we are able to sustain that conversation. Because if we are not at the table, we will be in the menu. What technically that means is that there will be some standards developed out there, and then we are called upon to implement, and then those standards basically give away the same rights we are trying to protect. The other thing which is very important, also a learning process we've gotten from this process, is bilateral engagement with counterparts. Okay, we sometimes have a solution where maybe some key stakeholders, just an example here, maybe one major group of developed countries are opposed to a certain idea. We have learned it's good to engage bilateral collaborative conversation, so that at least we can explain what is the problem. Some we have succeeded, some we have failed. But I think now I want, within the remaining time, just to mention some of the successes, so that I don't just talk about problems. So I'll talk strictly about the two-pillar solution, and I'll start with the pillar two. So pillar two has got the two global rules. One is called the subject to tax rule, and the other one is called the global minimum. And particularly of particular inputs here, something we are happy about so far is the subject to tax rule, which we negotiated for a long time. First, it was not really a solution we expected to ever come through, but through our persistence, it is there. It has two benefits. It's a minimum standard, which means that IF developing countries can demand the other IF members to include subject to tax rule in their treaties and give them additional taxing rights. And then the other thing is the subject to tax rule now includes service fees, which was something which was strongly opposed by some developed countries. Okay. In terms of the global rule, I think we are pleased to see that there is an opportunity of having what is called domestic minimum top-up tax legislation, which gives you a right to tax back which gives you a right to tax back income that would be taxed in the other jurisdiction if you don't protect yourself. And we as Secretariat, last year, one of the key products which has come out of this conversation, we have developed a suggested approach to drafting domestic minimum top-up tax, which is inspired by our participation and again, developing a practical solution which we are busy promoting to the continent because it's quite impactful. On pillar one, Amount B, which was concluded, it was concluded this year, now is included in the transfer pricing guideline. That was a key push by ATAF working closely with our IF members. And that is transformational because we see a number of distributors in the continent that still return losses, and Amount B giving a simplification and application of transfer pricing. It's a good solution, and we are currently also developing a solution, another suggested approach, so that Amount B, it's a reality to the continent, so that countries can implement it. One other thing about Amount B would have negotiated what is called a political commitment so that it can be accepted by counterparty jurisdiction as an arm's length solution. And lastly, on Amount A, which is basically new taxing rights, which gives the rights to tax highly profitable large companies, even in situations that don't create physical presence, the solution is not complete. So even what I'm saying is just what we have managed to negotiate so far. It is good, but we need to wait for the solution. A couple of good things that I've settled. We negotiated to have extractive sector excluded in the design because extractive sector is big in Africa, and that exclusion means that African countries can't keep the taxing rights of super profits in extractive sector. Then the other negotiation is a rule we call de minimis threshold, which basically allows many developing countries, including Africa, A, not to be part of issues of double tax elimination and Amount A, and also B, not to be caught up with a rule called marketing and distribution safe harbor, which sort of limits the allocation to the country. And that is beneficial because with those two, it means if there is ever going to be Amount A, then African countries will largely be a net recipient as opposed to their allocation reduced or taken away under allocation of elimination of double taxation. And lastly, a lower nexus threshold, which sort of increases the possibility of African countries getting Amount A allocation. So let me stop there, and maybe I'll take questions at a later stage. Thank you.
Thank you, Anthony. Please stay on as well as Emeka. I can see quite a lot of interest around the presentations you just made with Emeka and quite a number of questions coming through. And Anthony, you spoke about the tax to GDP ratio in Africa and being significantly lower than the rest of the world. And I know you explained this a bit, but I can see a question from one of our participants asking, why can't Africa mobilize internal domestic resources? What is the challenge in your view? Why is it that then as a continent, we are struggling to raise sufficient domestic? Maybe you can just quickly comment on that question, Anthony.
Yeah, that's a great question, which requires a lot to think about, but I'll touch on some key issues here. I think one fundamental issue is to address issues of aggressive tax planning by multinationals, particularly on the key sectors. So if a country, for example, is big in extractive, it is important to make every effort to ensure that A, we got the right tax policies around that sector, and two, capacitate tax officials to be able to deal with auditing multinationals. So key sectors are, of course, policy around those sectors and capacity to address issues that may arise from those key sectors. So extractives have been picked as one major issue because Africa is big in extractive. So it's not a coincidence I'm talking about that. So many countries are big in extractive, but those extractive sectors are dominated by multinationals. And therefore, if there is no sufficient capacity to audit meaningfully, effectively those multinationals supported by proper policies, then the tax to GDP tends to be low. because basically you are not getting the tax which should be collected from those multinationals. The second thing which sort of makes it exacerbates the situation is excessive tax incentives. So when we give excessive tax incentives, it's basically we are taking away the rights which we already have. So a conversation around tax incentive is important. And we see that the conversation and the Pillar 2, in many ways, it's a good conversation because now it's helping us to see how can we fix the gaps around tax incentives. We only have two options. One, either we reform the tax incentives or introduce a measure where we can start collecting the tax. And the fourth point, which speaks to low tax to GDP, is issues to do with tax administration systems, automation, and digitalization. Now, those issues are really important because when you digitalize, then you have better systems that can be able to identify and, of course, have a way of maybe proper risk assessment and, of course, more better integration so that you're able to bring many taxpayers to the taxness. So I think the conversation happening now around digitalization and integration of tax systems is important. And of course, that needs to work together with now modern technologies of data analytics to be able to do proper risk assessments that really can complement many efforts that we think are still relevant. Thank you.
Thank you, Anthony. And just a small announcement is that we are having challenges with our Facebook Live. For those of us who may be trying to join using Facebook, you can either use YouTube, which is working just fine, or continue on Zoom. Now, Emeka, there is a question that came for you, and probably you can speak into the technical assistance that we provide to countries and exactly how we've been able to deliver that in 2023. And you can probably touch, when you look at the report touches on technical assistance and work being done across the entire of the African continent. So Emeka, would you probably just speak into that question regarding what technical assistance we're providing and we've provided in the last 1 year? And looks like I think as we address, looks like we have a connection challenge with Emeka, and we will come back to that. Let me move to Tulani. Tulani is our senior manager in charge of Africa Multilateral Tax Cooperation. And Tulani, maybe before again we dig deep into our conversation, would you speak into what exactly are we talking about when we're talking about African Multilateral Tax Cooperation? What do we do in that space?
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, colleagues and all our members who have connected. We need to put our best foot forward as Africans in a space that is dominated by global interests, and also in a space where African countries have been primarily reactive as opposed to being proactive to some of the tax challenges facing them. And therefore, our outlook as Africa Multilateral Cooperation is to precisely do that, to put the African voice as a primary voice on development issues related to tax in spaces that debate these issues globally. We are in a connected world, and therefore it is important to factor this in and also make our presence felt in those areas. Now, my colleagues have highlighted all the products and the services that ATAF has provided. And the galvanization of all of these results in us portraying and fulfilling our role as ensuring that there's a space for African ideas and innovation, policy innovation that can be learned from, but also positioned in the global discussion. And this, of course, happens in an environment where you have to deal with multilateral organizations and large organizations that are in the space and that do standard setting. And so it is our function and role to coordinate that African voice, both technically through standard setting, through multilateralism, and through the inputs that we receive from domestic resource mobilization and member services through their feedback mechanisms, and put them on the global stage. Thank you.
Thank you, Thulani. And on the same breath, Thulani, again, a lot of work has been done in this area. When you look at the 2023 report regarding reforms that we are working on, our work with the African Union, again, would you just in brief mention some of the work that we have done and that we continue to do around supporting countries addressing illicit financial flows in Africa, and what exactly would you say then that we have done before we move to hear from our countries that are discussing, helping us understanding it from their perspective of how they see the work we've done?
Yeah, thank you. I think from understanding the role ATAF can play with a large partner and a continental leader like the African Union, is to position again the tax discussion at a policy level where ministers can start engaging on tax issues. And some of these can be adopted by heads of state through the forum and channels of the African Union. Our immediate success has been establishing the subcommittee on tax and IFFs, together with an approved strategy on tax and illicit financial flows, approved by ministers of finance through the African Union. And that's work that ATAF has done in collaboration and support of the African Union. Additionally, we've been able to put forward a total of 32 recommendations to ministers of finance, and all have been adopted by ministers of finance. And as I speak to you today, 18 of those have been accomplished and completed by ATAF. What I'm trying to illustrate is the importance of these areas where we're talking about combating illicit financial flows through a political commitment of our ministers. And now to marry the aspects of tax administration and tax policy, it works that having that support and political buy-in in some of the tools and products that ATAF has developed will ensure that there's that conversation on the continent, but also it will ensure that as Africans, we have a united voice, we have a united vision, and we have the backing of a global player in the form of the African Union. And lastly, if I may add, it's important to factor in that the African Union has not been doing extensive work on taxation, and by partnering with ATAF, we're providing that technical support, and which you're starting to see now in the conversation we're having around the Framework Convention at the United Nations, and the support on tax issues as raised by the Africa Group. Thank you.
Thank you, Thulani. I can see a number of questions coming in, and we'll respond to them as we go along. But I would like to sort of shift the conversation to, as we began this, I mentioned that we're going to hear from the ATAF perspective, and hearing it from our senior leadership regarding the work and the impact this has had on the continent. But we also wanted to hear from countries that are members regarding how they see the work that we're doing and how that work has specifically impacted domestic resource mobilization in their countries, and some challenges around addressing illicit financial flows, building capacity for tax administration, and such other issues. So I want to jump then to the other side, and I want to start with Stella. And Stella is from Uganda, and Uganda is one of our member countries. Stella Nyapendi is the country correspondent from Uganda Revenue Authority. Good morning. It's still morning here where we are in Pretoria, but I'm sure it's good afternoon where you are in Uganda. Good afternoon, Stella. I hope you can hear me.
I can hear you. Good afternoon.
Excellent.
I hope you can hear me.
Yes, we can hear you very clearly. So Stella, yes. Just would you make a comment regarding you? I mean, we when you look at the report that ATAF shared, ATAF has provided about 35 technical assistance to 35 countries, covering, all countries across Africa. And Uganda has been one of those countries that have benefited from the technical assistance and some of the work that ATAF has done. Would you speak into specifically how has this assisted, helped Uganda Revenue Authority and by extension the country in this area of domestic resource mobilization?
Thank you, Linston, and thanks to Emeka, Tulani, and Anthony for the presentation. Spoken quite profoundly about the work that ATAF has done. But to start, I want to indicate that URA, Uganda Revenue Authority, and Uganda indeed joined African Tax in 2009. So we are one of the pioneer countries. So as soon as we joined, we took advantage of every opportunity as it was laid out. Speaking to DRM, Domestic Revenue Resource Mobilization, we have benefited quite immensely as a country, and the impact is profound. The impact cannot be underestimated, it can't be underscored. First, I want to speak about the tax policy work that has come through the suggested approaches that we had from Anthony. Yes, Uganda belongs to and is part of quite a number of these committees. We are members to the Cross-Border Committee. We are members to the Direct Tax Committee. Uganda is a member to the Exchange of Information Committee. And through that, we've had a benefit of appreciating the suggested approaches that came through. So one of the things that Uganda did was to immediately set up an international tax unit. And that way, we knew that we had the solution for curbing illicit financial flows through capacity building and technical assistance. ATAF has handheld us as a country, and we have seen revenue grow with the training coming through, with the training in the audits, training in the double tax agreements and tax treaties. So these suggested approaches, we applied them as much as applicable to us as a country, and we've seen revenue grow in leaps and bounds. It continues to grow. We also have benefited from the development of African experts. Uganda has a number of experts in international tax. We have experts in tax invoice trading. We have experts in VAT, we have experts in audit, in extractives, and all those have benefited from the ATAF homegrown Africanized trainings that look to developing African solutions to the unique African problems. And for us as Uganda, we know that we are unique in many ways. First, looking at the informal sector, but we've seen that change over time. We are still grappling with the low GDP. We stand at 14%, but we know that with the DRM as it were, and if we apply to the latter, we shall see the revenue grow. I also wanted to speak specifically to tax policy. Last year, under the Exchange of Information unit that was set up, we were able to have the law on automatic exchange of information passed by our parliament. And since then, we've also seen revenue grow. We've seen the requests coming in from our peers. And this year alone, there is just one case that gave us 30 billion shillings. That in terms of dollars is quite an amount of money that is coming through. So we are seeing revenue grow and a lot of support that is coming through ATAF handholding us and through the suggested approaches. We've also benefited from the collaborations with other countries, our experts supporting the other member countries in training and also offering assistance in the areas of expertise, extractives, we have risk management. All those are areas where we have solutions and experts that are coming through. What happens when they come from the technical assistance training that they offer with other countries, they are expected to pass on the knowledge because as understood, revenue bodies have quite a bit of high turnover. And therefore, if we don't have the revenue, if we don't have the knowledge sustained within the revenue authority, then the work that ATAF is doing will not be as impactful. So as a country, we are ensuring that we train as much using our experts that support ATAF and support African countries. We are quite deliberate in ensuring that these experts pass on the knowledge and the learning points from ATAF and through the experiences that we shared. So there is clearly an increase in domestic revenue mobilization, and of course, coming from the fact that our domestic tax department is now bringing in more revenue, 70% of the revenue, as compared to the customs, because we know that we can only achieve that by mobilizing revenue domestically. So we've seen changes through the experience we're getting from ATAF. We also had training for our masters colleagues in the tax, the training of masters in tax through ATAF, and those we still have some of those staff, and they are really training many of the others. Then we benefited from transfer pricing training, the international tax team, and therefore we are looking at revenue that is coming in even before you go to the courts of law, because we know transfer pricing before a court of law, before tribunal, is quite difficult in terms of determining whether there is a win or loss. So we settle most of those cases through alternative dispute resolution, which saves quite a lot of time, and it saves quite a number. It saves costs in a very, very big way. So we are seeing improvements and a lot of focus coming through multinationals. The other thing I wanted to speak about is digitalization. Yes, Uganda has been part of this story of digitalization and improvement of legislation plugged in. And last year, we introduced the digital service tax. And again, revenue is coming in. We know that by the end of this month, which marks the end of the financial year, there will be revenues peaking to digital service tax. And the beauty with regionalization and sharing experiences is we picked this with the guidance of ATAF. We picked this from Kenya Revenue Authority, Tanzania also coming on board, and together we are making headway and also moving in leaps and bounds. So ATAF has been quite supportive in developing African solutions. And looking at the 2023 report, compared to the 2009-2010, it's clear and vivid that if we continue focusing in the right places, as Africa, we are going to mobilize our revenue domestically in a very focused manner. I also wanted to speak about research. Research under ATRN, we've made use of the statistics to inform our planning, to also inform areas that are quite unique. For example, recently URA was going through a structural review, and it's only the numbers from ATAF that spoke to us in terms of how does it compare with other countries, how do the departments compare, and it gave us quite very good insights, which informed our basis for improving our structure, knowing that we are drawing from experiences from other jurisdictions. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Stella. And I love what you spoke into direct impact. And I know this is just, I mean, some of the examples that I know if we had more time, probably you could share a bit more. And I love what you mentioned about, you know, ATAF bringing together African countries to share experiences. And therefore, from each other, we're able to learn what is working, what is not working, and then be able to share experiences in that sense. So thank you very much, Stella. I want to move to Dr. Philip. And Dr. Philip is the Director of Research and Planning at Sierra Leone. So I want to jump to the other part of Africa. Doctor, we again, similar to Stella, would just like you to share your experience and some of the impact that you see the work that ATAF has been doing, having on your country around these areas that we are talking about: policy, tax administration, capacity building, domestic resource mobilization. Please speak into areas that Sierra Leone has benefited and has been impacted by the work that is being done by ATAF. Welcome, Doctor.
Good morning. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you, Dr.
All right, thank you very much. Let me bring you greetings from the Commissioner General, who actually promised to join even this session. She has been very much interested, having seen the podcast and the flyer. I don't know whether she'll join at some point. I know she has some meetings this morning. But yes, from ATAF, this has been very much a very much important institution to the National Revenue Authority. I know I've been participating first as a country correspondent. I've been the country correspondent for ATAF from 2018. But I'm also the Director of Research and Planning at the National Revenue Authority. So as a country correspondent, I've been at the higher level of discussions both within the Revenue Authority, but also at ATAF. 2019, when we signed an MOU with ATAF, to actually deliver support in terms of transfer pricing capacity building. So what happened was we knew there were issues who are not complying with what is required of their obligations in terms of taxation. So we engaged ATAF together Oxfam, and so we in Kampala we signed an MOU, kind of a tripartite, wherein that the country signed with ATAF and then with Oxfam being a witness to it. So since then we started capacity building in transfer pricing. First, we had a scoping study from ATAF, wherein they actually analyzed in terms of our transfer pricing needs as a country. So they went through our current legislations to see there where there were gaps and what we are supposed to do using their own suggested approach to transfer pricing. So since then, we started drafting the legislation with the leadership of ATAF. And then at some point, we had the World Bank to also review what we did. So in 2021, we completed the legislation on transfer price regulation for income tax. And that was very much important the first time we had it. And so with that also, we not only did we complete the legislation, the regulation, but ATAF also continued to provide training in transfer pricing audits. And then at some point, we had an in-country, in-person training, but later we started doing it virtually, particularly given the COVID restrictions. And so we continued with that, but at some point the COVID restrictions also could not continue, not actually allow us to complete some of the training. So this is something we also have to now re-engage ATAF to see how they can complete the transfer pricing audit training. But there's a lot of capacity building we benefited from it. Now I can tell you from our own our extractive industry revenue units I have here. They've done a lot of audits. We haven't done a transfer pricing audit yet, but we've done a lot of audits for which most of the trainings also we benefited from ATAF and other development partners. Before then, there was no way our institution, our audit department, our audit unit can venture to audit any of the extractive industry companies, because these are very complex when their industry is a bit complex, and in fact they will not even allow anybody to go and audit them. But because of the capacity in terms of audits, we can now see almost all of them who have succeeded in auditing all of these companies, and the revenues we have actually attained from the audits of these companies have been very much as significant. And so not only in terms of transfer pricing audits or transfer pricing training, or in terms of transfer pricing legislation, we're also seeing from ATAF in terms of the data-driven aspects. The ATO, I've been part of the ATO, the Annual Tax Outlook of ATAF, the publication as well as the data bank for which you have access to. This has been very useful for us. In 2023, between 2020 and 2023, we are doing our strategic plan for 2023 to 2027. And we made use of most of the information in terms of research that have been done by ATAF, but also based on the compliance statistics and other things that I can find within the ATO publication and within the data bank for us to actually come up with policies and measures for us to assess ourselves and do a comparative analysis of where we stand compared to our peers and also compared to the average for ATO countries, and see how we can come up with targets within the strategic plan. So this has been also very useful for us, and that's why the ATO will continue to make use of it. At the moment, we are even conducting the research to do a full comparative analysis of where we stand in key variables within compared to other ATO countries, but also compare within the average for ATO. We've benefited from a lot of trainings from ATAF. A lot of them are not only on audits, not only on VAT, but a lot of them as well based on tax exemptions, etc., etc. And I know from the global point, this has also been very important for us, because maybe this is where ATAF also needs to ensure member countries actually understand the benefits of what they have done from the global point. They have done a lot of, they have been the African voice for the global tax agenda. It's from all this global tax agenda after ATAF's negotiation and in terms of their success. So our own Commissioner General, being the vice chair of the ATAF in ATAF Women in ATAF Women Network, of course, in Africa. So she was the vice chair of the board of the AWITN, which is very much important for us, which implies we want to prioritize how we can make use of gender mainstreaming within our institution. And as a result of that, we have even now done a gender balance maturity assessment using the model. So even though we have completed that internally, we are here to validate that with senior management. So once we validate that senior management, we now share our assessment to ATAF. The advantage here is the fact that after doing that, we'll be able to actually see how we can mainstream gender issues, how we can improve gender balance, improve within the organization. And these are critical things we think we have benefited from ATAF. So generally, ATAF has been very useful to our country. Before then, senior management or even at middle management levels now aware of ATAF. Before then, visibility of ATAF had been a problem, but now everybody knows about ATAF. A lot of trainings, ATAF from HR to domestic taxation, a lot of them, and others relating to research. And as I'm talking about research, in terms of the ATRN, I know last year, I attended the workshop in Tanzania, and where I was also a speaker in one of the sessions. We see how important the ATRN actually is, and where we can make use of that research in addition to the ATO publications, as well as the data we get from that. So just from that, from our country. Over.
Thank you very much, Dr. Philip, for those insights into how Sierra Leone has benefited from being a member of ATAF and some of the work that has been going on there. I can see your questions coming in. Please keep them coming. We will respond to them as we continue. But I want to move to our last panelist of the day. And this is Mr. Ronald Niwenshuti, who is the Assistant Commissioner in charge of Taxpayer Audit Division at the Rwanda Revenue Authority. And again, we are just sampling out countries. I wish we had more time. We would have probably brought in more countries. But for today, we are only able to handle 3 countries, but we'll keep on sharing more and more countries, sharing their experiences with regard to their involvement with ATAF and the impact of the work of ATAF. So Ronald, please would you share with us from a Rwandese perspective, how has the work that is being done by ATAF and sharing experiences around policy, tax administration, have you been able to benefit in any way, and has there been any impact on to Rwanda in that regard? Welcome, Ronald.
Thank you, Remson, and I want to confirm that I'm audible to everyone.
Yes, you are. Thank you very much. Very clear.
Thank you very much. So let me echo my previous panels and I say greetings to everyone on this line, and also appreciate ATAF for organizing such a platform for us to be able to share our experiences, but also give room to others to also be able to know where they can turn to in case they want to solve problems that affect their domestic resource mobilization. So one of the areas that we have benefited from ATAF is international taxation. Here I want to mention that in the inception of this unit, we worked with ATAF to advise us on how best we can put up a unit and what skills and experiences that we need to be put together so that we are able to get benefit out of this. And from that, we have walked the journey with ATAF through 3 ways. One, we have been able to benefit through technical support. And this, I mean, direct case support. And that advisory has helped us, not only our team to know what they should be doing, but also be practical in terms of giving the knowledge to them so that they can use it in other cases. And I'm glad to say that at least for the last year, we've been able to at least hit around $7 million out of these assessments, and we see more coming. And this has been growing over the years. We have also have another approach that we have used, which has been workshops. And these workshops not only benefited the staff in international taxation, but also even other staff in audit. And this has been really very, very helpful because they have been able to audit sectors. And this, Emeka mentioned about it, that we have been able to get support in auditing other sectors like mining and the rest. So this has also been helpful to us. And lastly, it has been to streamline our documentation. Here, I mean our laws, the manual that we use in audit. And we have received a lot of support from ATAF in trying to make sure that what we are putting there as a law really captures what we intend to capture, and we don't have any leakages in the future. So in 2023, that's when we enacted our new law on income tax. We also had our VAT law, and we also rolled out our manual as well as the sector notes to support us both in auditing, but also be able to update our laws to the standards and the times that we are in. So ATAF has also helped us in that area. So in those three areas, we have been able to receive that support, and we are greatly appreciating, and also continue to look forward to that support. Another thing that we have received from ATAF was when we started introducing and discussing the digital taxation, policymakers wanted to know what is the cost benefit if we introduce such a policy. And one of the stakeholders that we turned to was ATAF to conduct a research for us to know how much we can benefit if that law comes out, and be able to put up a case to the policymakers and say, look, this is how much revenue we can collect. We understand there are other policies that might get affected, but it's up to you to balance. And I'm glad to say that the research was done, and we were able to put up a case. And today, discussions are underway so that we can have a DST law, but also our VAT law has been updated to include digital services. Not only that, ATAF has also helped us in the area of exchange of information. Rwanda is in the roadmap of having an automatic exchange of information on board. We expect to have a peer review, but we already have the exchange of information on request. So setting up the unit, preparing the law, putting in place all that is needed to have a unit that really answers the questions of proper standards in exchange of information. We have always looked up to ATAF for support, and we have greatly received that without any challenge. And lastly, last year we had a masterclass, which also our executives attended, which was hosted in Rwanda. Our executives attended, and this helped them to share experience, but also get to listen from others what they are facing and how they can overcome them. So among the many, let me not take long, among the many benefits that we have got from ATAF, I would just mention that, and I would say this has been a very beneficial marriage over the years. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ronald. I like the way you ended it, that this has been a very beneficial marriage. And we are glad to see that the work that is being done here at ATAF, together with our, various donors and partners, that is making impact to our member countries. And Ronald and the team, please stay on, because I can see quite a number of questions that would like to handle us before we wrap up our conversation for the day. Like I mentioned before, today we just wanted to provide some highlights regarding the work that we do here, what we did last year, and what is in the report, and how this has made practical impact in DRM, in providing capacity, in policy work, in being the African voice in various issues. And that is exactly what we wanted to do. I can see a few questions, quite a number of them actually, and please keep them coming. And I want to start with this one, and I think I'm going to throw this to Anthony or to Lani. And the question refers to a speech that was made by the African Development Bank during the recently held summit in Nairobi. And this is what the president said of the African Development Bank. He said multinationals must pay their taxes in Africa. And I know Anthony mentioned a bit about the work that is ongoing on the international tax space, as well as Tulani. And they are asking, what is Africa's proposal through ATAF for a minimum tax on multinationals? And he says, we know that the OECD made a proposal of 15%, but Africa didn't agree. But we haven't had a proposal from Africa. So Tulani or Anthony, I think you can speak into this question Now over to you, Tulani.
Yeah, thanks very much. I'll start, and I know my colleague Anthony did quite a bit of negotiations on this work. Firstly, in the proposal and in the discussions with the OECD, ATAF and other countries had pushed for a minimum global tax rate of 21% and above. But through the negotiations and the wheeling and dealing, the inclusive framework landed at 15%. So I think in terms of the proposal that ATAF had put forward was a proposal of 21% and above. And this was primarily based on the fact that looking at the average tax rates on the continent, the corporate income tax rates on the continent. And so we felt that 21% and above would be suitable. And we also felt that that would be a rate that would discourage aggressive tax planning and obviously have a net effect on our efforts to combat illicit financial flows. But as I mentioned, Anthony, my colleague Anthony, was part of the wheeling and dealing in the negotiations, and he could probably shed more light around how we came to 15%. But as you know, with these things, it's a negotiation, and it's if you lose on one end, or if you have a setback on other, we claw it back in other areas that Anthony did highlight earlier about our achievements. So let me hand over the remaining part of the question to Anthony. Thank you.
Thank you, Tulani. Anthony, over to you.
Thank you very much, Tulani. To explain the point you made, these are negotiation and very tough negotiation. As we know, negotiations, you don't get everything you ask for. So that's certainly one of the areas that we did not get what we wanted. We certainly asked for higher rates, which was at least 20%, 21%, what Tulani is talking about. And that was informed by the realities, because the realities, the African CIT rates actually average 28. If you do like CIT average in the African countries, you land to around 28%. So we wanted a rate which is very close to that average, so that at least it is not creating an incentive to shift profits from Africa to another jurisdiction when that minimum rate is close to where the tax is being taxed from. But now at 15%, we have said this on many occasions. We still think that if you got CIT rates, maybe like many African countries at 30, maybe a number of them also at 28, 27. And then the global minimum is 15. So there is still some advantage which can be obtained by shifting profits across to those other jurisdictions where the rates will be going forward maybe at around 15%. And so our issue is that the global minimum tax is a step in the right direction, but it is not addressed still the opportunities of artificial profit shifting from the continent. And this, therefore, is a conversation which is still open to be addressed. And that's why we have said the conversation which is happening now, even at the UN, level, those are some of the issues which need to be articulated, that are there other measures that can be proposed to address this artificial profit shifting, because we think the direction was good, but we did not land there. There's still an opportunity. How did we land there? Purely through negotiation. Powerful countries pushed a rate which is in and around their own rates. And of course, that's why we lost the game, unfortunately. So largely, it was driven by certain global players that wanted a rate which is not significantly off their CIT rates. And most of them are actually investment hubs. And that's where we landed. Thanks.
Thank you, Anthony, and thank you, Tulani, for explaining that. I think we do appreciate negotiations are complex, and therefore sometimes we may not necessarily get everything we're looking for, but we are making steps in the right direction. And there's another question, Anthony, regarding IFFs, and probably you or Thulani could speak into this. And one of the participants is asking, what topology studies has ATAF and capacity building carried out on IFF from emerging economies? And the focus here, the participant is asking, especially around virtual currencies, cryptocurrencies, because it's one of the major means of IFF confronting Africa. Maybe Anthony, would you or Thulani want to mention something around this space?
Yeah, I can mention a couple of things.
Yeah,
indeed, digitalization has created opportunities, but also challenges. And one of the challenges is now these other virtual economies, cryptocurrencies, and others, which we need to be aware of. And also make sure that we can respond to them as a continent, so that we're able to limit illicit financial flows. So a couple of things. ATAF released a publication, I think last year but one, on the cryptocurrency, which is actually like the entry point to the conversation. And that publication basically is showing the economy, how it's structured. And we want to take the conversation to the next level, which is to start thinking about what are the appropriate policy responses on taxing that economy. There are a couple of countries in the continent that are already introducing some interesting measures for others also to be aware of. One of those is Kenya introduced a measure called the digital asset taxation, which is basically looking at taxing the digital assets from realization perspective of if you sell the cryptocurrencies and related assets, then there could be a way of taxing those, particularly using the platforms as a basis of accounting for tax. And I know there are a couple of other countries thinking about the same approach. So those are some of the global thoughts out there. And I think we take up the challenge. We also need to develop something which, of course, we can present to the rest of the continent to consider. Because it is true, whereas the cryptocurrencies are not legal tenders in many African countries, the reality is there is a lot of trading. Therefore, it's a very big economy, which is sort of not being focused on from a tax perspective. So, but I know, I see Emeka's video is on, and we have known when one of us puts a video, he basically says you want to speak. So Emeka was part of that product that I talked about. So I'd like him to give him a bit, to give more context on that product. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Anthony. And over to you, Emeka.
Thank you, Anthony. I wasn't actually putting on the video to speak, but since that has happened, and I think Anthony has covered it much in terms of crypto. It's an evolving environment. It's actually a frontier issue for most countries. In terms of policy, it goes beyond taxation because it has to do with, again, what is the characterization within the country? Like Anthony mentioned, is it a financial asset? Is it a legal tender? Is an intangible? What kind of intangible is it? And all that, because that will determine how it's treated for tax purposes. So it's a conversation that goes beyond the Revenue Authority, goes beyond the Ministry of Finance, involves the central bank and other people. But in terms of the IFF part of it, part of the work being done, it's how do you have visibility of these transactions? Because a lot of things are done with crypto now online. So how do you have visibility? How do you see these transactions? The product that Anthony spoke about talks to some, again, at a simpler level. What could you look at to point you to if there's crypto transaction going on within, whether with an individual or not? But post those papers being done, we've also seen in the industry now that there are tools and entities available that help tax administrations to track and trace transactions and able to give you aggregates. Of course, we can't get into the technical details of how crypto works because you have the P2P, you have the cold wallets and all that, which still gives some level of invisibility to certain transactions or people holding such assets. But there are ongoing works, and then, of course, you have the crypto asset reporting framework, which is now layered on the Exchange of Information AUI framework. for countries to be able to exchange information and platforms to be able to submit information on transactions happening on their platform. So all this coming, and like I said at the beginning, part of what we're trying to do with the capacity building is some of this, how do we mainstream it? Because when we look at crypto, for example, as in terms of policy, it could be a separate item to look at how do you treat it. But if you're conducting an audit, you still need to know how do you identify if there's been a crypto asset? How do you understand how the asset has been used? What are the tools available in your audit if you're auditing a system? How do you look at what they have on the system? Do they have certain wallets and such? So again, these are the things that we have to mainstream within the general processes again, and how that works beyond the policy aspect or the reporting part of it. So that's around crypto. Then the second part is we always say crypto, but we'll move it further to the digital financial assets, because now you have the NFTs and such and other forms of assets that people hold and still trade, which are not used as currency. So again, in those aspects, is about the policy, and like Anthony said, some countries have taken steps like Kenya, but I think ATAF has two products. One looking at the VAT treatment of digital financial assets, and then one discussing the general policy considerations, including NFTs and such in that instance.
Thank you, Emeka. And Emeka, before I let you go, there are two questions probably that are specifically directed to you, and probably you can respond to them. One is, how often does ATAF roll out capacity building programs for member countries? That's question number one. And the other question was, I think someone is wondering, how can they be part of the research that is happening at ATAF? How do they get themselves involved in the research that is currently, ongoing? Maybe Emeka, you could speak into that. Emeka, I think you're muted.
All right.
Yeah.
On a yearly basis, ATAF reviews the capacity building programs, the trainings, the general ones offered through the Tax Academy, to see, because we get feedback. We do surveys for those that participate, and we also survey the training managers of the revenue authorities to find out the impact of those trainings. So we review our catalog of trainings and see those that are most relevant, and we try to add or remove depending. But there are certain trainings that you find across the years that we always keep, and that has to do with compliance verification. So audits, VAT fraud, transfer pricing, those are consistent. And they are blended programs where we have the basic, intermediate, and then the advanced. So you have to go through each of those steps and all. But by the end of this year, again, I spoke about expanding the reach and providing accessibility. You find that ATAF will launch a rejuvenated e-learning platform where we'll put up, again, most of these trainings for ease of access. But this is a phase project that is going on. So as we also go within the online approach, the e-learning, because we're trying to make sure we have a full training school that is online, we'll be able to add more trainings, because there's also the part of congregating people physically and in person. So you find that in methodology that there will be the part where you get to have either physical or virtual interaction, but you also have the self-study parts and workshops online, all integrated into one platform with study materials and assessments to follow. So yes, so we do add and evaluate and see what programs we add on and what programs we might need to pull back as the environment changes. But just be on the lookout as we launch the e-learning platform. You'll find a lot more new trainings and models added on there from what you've seen from ATAF. Then on the second part, how do you join the research? So we have the African Tax Research Network, which this year's Congress would hold in Botswana in September, between September 2nd and 5th, I think. So again, we'll be sharing more communication around that. I'm sure maybe in the chat, the comms team will put in the link to the ATRN landing page. You're invited to register. There's some registration fee, but for revenue officials, it's free. But all the programs are provided there. The ATRN has its own board made up of academics who have made their impact on the continent on taxation, because we try to give it some academic independence, being that is academic research focused in that instance. So if anybody interested, you get on the landing page, you register for the event, and you see all the available other whether webinars or seminars done under the ATRN for research and how you can contribute to the papers. And within the ATRN, we have the AMTJ, the Africa Multidisciplinary Tax Journal, which again has gone through the process. We are at the final end of it, of Scopus accreditation, where the papers go through the scientific review process. Is a double-layered blind review, where it's reviewed twice, but blind review. In that case, again, that integrity of the review. But we're also working on a stream where those that don't make it to the MTEJ, we have a series of working papers that can be further developed. And we share that publicly, and again, create mentorship where people can be helped through those working papers again to guide them to how to make them into full finished academic research and such. So those are ways to participate. But once you see the landing page, you see more information around that. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Emeka, and thank you. I think you've responded to almost all the questions I could see on research, but in case any of our participants has any other question that has not been responded to, we will share our email address on the chat so that you can be able to ask that question. Maybe a question for Anthony, and I'll request our panelists to also check in the chat. I can see Tulani has responded to quite a number of the questions, so I will go back to those questions that have already been responded to. So please, panelists, I ask you to just check the questions so that you can respond to some of them, because there are quite a number, and we may not have time to respond to all of them. Anthony, there was a question regarding taxation of the extractives industry, and how specifically kind of support that ATAF is providing around taxation of the extractives industry, and the approach we are taking around the extractives industry. Would you maybe in a minute or two just speak into how ATAF is dealing or addressing or supporting countries in this area?
Thank you very much for the question. I think that's an important area, as I mentioned. One of the areas that African countries really need to make sure that we have the right capacity. So a couple of things we are doing as a secretariat is to build, of course, the subject matter experts in the extractives industry itself, and also to have very targeted programs for countries that have resource rich. So we've been having a long-standing program with countries such as Botswana, Zambia, now getting into a couple of others, including Sierra Leone, so the list is long. And therefore, when we get into those countries, we make sure that we provide not only the technical issues around taxation, but also the knowledge about the industry itself. So industry knowledge is critical, including the value chain and analysis, so that at least the auditors are able to understand the intricacies of the industry. And then now we nuance that conversation with the technicalities of multinational issues, that's transfer pricing and broadly international tax, and also some very domestic tax issues which are relevant to be addressed. And then there is a fundamental conversation on pricing the mineral resource. So we provide solutions like I talked about, commodity pricing legislation, which is quite impactful, and also some guided approaches on how to address situations where you don't have reference or quoted prices. So there are quite a range of things we do when we get to the country, but I think the industry value chain analysis and pricing are really key parts. We equally partner with some global partners that also have experience in some areas to strengthen that capacity building in the countries. Thanks.
Thank you, Anthony. And just going back to Emeka, there's a question here that I think is a critical question. And one of the participants is asking, can we share key highlights with the audience on how technical assistance to country can be delivered or was delivered in 2023? I know you touched a little bit on this, Emeka, but maybe you can add a bit more on this. And also maybe recognize some of our key partners because and I know some of them are joining this conversation. We've provided both financial and technical support in making a lot of this work happen. Emeka.
All right. Thank you, Lindstrom. In terms of delivery of technical assistance, so there are many models to it. I think as Anthony mentioned, we have the in-house expertise in certain areas that we use in delivery. We also work with revenue administrations who partner with us to provide us resources and experts to deliver such. But beyond that, we have other partnerships that is either financial or resource-based relationship in delivery, or having common objective or purpose in delivery, where we combine in order not to duplicate and to enable the organization to optimize resources. In such instances, for example, if you look at the TIWB program on the continent, ATAF works together with the TIWB secretariats in delivering TIWB compliance programs across the continent. So again, if you look at the results from both organizations, you see the mirroring in that instance. But ATAF is the strategic partner to TIWB on the continent for delivery of such programs. We also have a partnership with GIZ, who has provided a lot of support to ATAF across training, capacity building. Currently, we have in-country IFF programs. We've identified priority countries, about 15 of them, in the coming year that we're working on to provide support to them on how to mitigate IFF and improve DRM. And we're working on this in collaboration with GIZ. And then beyond this, there are also training programs and capacity building that we're providing. We have the IGF, for example. Anthony touched on partners we work with on extractives, who has also been a standing partner on delivery of support and capacity building on extractives. There's the UNDP, there's the World Bank, and there's the Global Forum on exchange of information. So we have an area of partners, and we work closely also with WATAF on the region. And of course, as Tulani must have mentioned, we have the MOU with the AUC. So again, we work closely with the AUC, again, in delivering capacity to countries. We've had the regional consultations on some of the issues Anthony discussed, where we engage these countries again together with the AUC. So we have this area of partnerships that we use in delivery of technical assistance. In terms of requesting for technical assistance, members, again, on our website, there's the link, but you could also send an email to ATAF, either through comms or to the Office of the Executive Secretary, or to member services. I'm sure the communication team will share these email addresses in the chat again of the request. But the request coming from Revenue Administration will be required to have come from the Office of the Director General, Commissioner General, Executive Chairman, but basically the head of the tax administration to ATAF. And then we will take up from there and engage with the country. Where scoping mission is required, we come in and have conversations with the various units and departments of the Revenue Authority. If it's a specific issue that has been identified for short-term intervention, and then we engage the country and build out the outline and work plan for delivery of that program and what is required. We identify the experts, whether in-house or with partners. Also in that discussion with the country, find out partners that are already working with you and see how we align and optimize that. So that's a part of the process. And of course, if it's a TIWB request, we have a continuous engagement with TIWB secretariats on how we collaborate and partner in ensuring that African countries get the best of that program in that instance. So again, if that request is made, we still engage with TIWB to see how best to deliver that program to African countries. So those are the ways we deliver the programs. And I hope that provided answer to the question. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Emeka. And finally, as we bring the question answer session to a close, and I can see most of them have been answered by our panelists, but I just want to take this one because I think it's not been responded to yet. And I want to ask Tulani maybe to make a comment on this. And the question is, how has ATAF navigated the line between the UN and the OECD with regard to setting global norms? And being an observer at OECD and yet interested in achieving a win-win solution for the African revenue. I know Anthony touched on this a bit and also Tulani, but maybe you could also speak into whether is there a line in between the UN and the OECD, and if there is, then how are we navigating that space? Over to you, Tulani.
Thank you very much, Lindstrom, and thanks for the question. I think primarily what we need to keep in mind is that ATAF is a technical organization supporting its membership as they navigate these global discussions. And also primarily since our inception as an organization, we've always advocated for the allocation of taxing rights and profits to source countries that being African countries. And so fundamentally, we are guided by that principle. If you listened to Anthony's response around the work we did in Amount A, he was stressing the level of technical detail and support that ATAF provided to its members in the inclusive framework, particularly for the boosting of the amount A allocation to African countries. And so that line of always advocating for more profits to be allocated to African countries was preserved even in that discussion. And in both organizations, OECD and the United Nations, we play an observer role, and I think also Anthony did highlight that we're playing an observer role, and we're playing a role that technically supports members. So now, if you look at the implementation of Pillar 2 in 2024, a number of our member countries, and again was highlighted in the earlier discussion, have started to implement regulatory frameworks such as the domestic minimum top-up tax. Now, that is an outcome of the OECD discussion, but equally, our members have reached out to us to say we require technical support in that. At the same time, our members have also said we want to have a greater discussion on greater inclusivity around international tax cooperation and how best can ATAF support the technical inputs we'll be making in New York at the UN. And so it is an additional workload for the organization, but it is the kind of work that is responsive to the needs of the members, as was highlighted in Emeka's introductory remarks, that we are responsive to the members' needs, and we are further responsive to policy alignment and the African voice on the continent. And what we're seeing is that our members also want a greater say and a greater push for some of the issues that are affecting them that may not be top of the agenda in developed countries or in the OECD spaces. And so we will continue to play that advisory, technical, and support role to our members and to our partner organizations like the African Union. And we'll monitor both processes as they evolve. Where our members are involved, we will assist and monitor those processes. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Tulani, and thank you to all the panelists. And before we just close, I'd like to invite Refilwe. We thought it's important for us to highlight some of the upcoming events that are scheduled in the next couple of months so that our participants can also be aware and probably how they can participate in those upcoming events. So Refilwe, who is in our comms team, will share with us just what are we up to in the next couple of weeks or months. Over to you, Refilwe.
Thank you very much, Lindstrom. Really hearty conversations indeed. I'm just going to jump on what Emeka has already mentioned, that we've got the 4th volume of the African Multidisciplinary Tax Journal coming up. So that's the launch of that 4th volume. It's on the 3rd of July, and it's going to be an online event. Please look out for the registration link on our social media platforms, as well as in your email. And then in a couple, I think about 2 weeks' time, we've got the ATAF VAT workshop happening in Kigali, Rwanda. That's from the 18th to the 21st of June. And then these are just a few events I'm mentioning. Then we've got the African Tax Research Network, that's the ATRN 9th Congress happening in Gaborone, Botswana, 3 to 5 September. And please do keep an eye out on our social media platforms. Please follow us at ATAF Tax, and you'll have all those updates. Additionally, I've put links in our chat box. Please don't feel afraid to contact us, communication@ataftax.org. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Refilwe, and sincere thanks to all of you for joining our conversation today. And I want to begin by thanking our panelists for sharing wonderful insights. I wish we had more time. There's a lot to talk about, and I can see the interest from our participants, the questions, the comments that are coming through. So I want to say a big thank you to our Mr. Emeka Nanku, who is our acting senior manager in charge of member services. Again, a big thank you to Mr. Anthony Munanda, who is our acting senior manager in charge of domestic resource mobilization. Thank you again to Mr. Tulani Shongwe, who is the acting senior manager in charge of Africa, multilateral tax cooperation. And again, a big thank you to Ronald Nimenshuti from Rwanda, Dr. Philip Kabgo from Sierra Leone, and Ms. Stella Nyapendi from Uganda Revenue Authority. Thank you for sharing your insights, and thank you for taking time to share with us today. Thank you again to the entire team at ATAF that made this happen, and our donors and our sponsors who continue to support us in the events in shaping the tax landscape in Africa. And we are proud to see the work that is ongoing and the impact this work has had in the continent. And our commitment again is, our commitment here at ATAF is to continue to support all our member countries and the entire of Africa to continue to address illicit financial flows, to continue to build our DRM and continue to build capacity within Africa, and to provide a platform really that enables us as countries to share knowledge, to share experience, and to see how we address challenges that are unique to our context. So again, thank you to our participants for staying on, for your questions and comments. And until next time, from here at ATAF, we say thank you very much. Have a nice day, have a nice afternoon, have a nice evening, depending on where you're joining us from. And bye-bye to all of us. Thank you very much.